what really resonated with audiences, and this is one that clearly did. So we're very glad that you're coming back this year to give it again. I'm going to start the welcome. As I mentioned, I'm actually, me and Noah and potentially Ashley, we're all at a teaching pre-conference for our professional society, the Society for Personality and Social Psychology. So we've left that, but we need to go back because we actually present at the conference at 12:30. So we're going to leave you in TLC staff hands for today, and then we'll catch this on the recording. For anyone who can't be here, we archive all of our events on our webpage to check out those recordings, and this event is going to be wonderful. Before we get to today, we have this professional development series every Wednesday at noon. My colleagues will drop links into the chat about the series itself. You can earn a professional development certificate, either as a graduate teaching assistant or a faculty or staff member. If you're a faculty member, you can also potentially apply for TLC fellow status. And fellow status is not only amazing honorific, but also means you get to present in our PD series next year. So if you have an idea you'd like to share with people across campus on teaching, we'd love for you to apply for that fellow opportunity. Next week, we will have a professional development event called Getting Engaged in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, a discussion about things to know getting started. This is a follow-up to a workshop that Jason Bergtold provided in a panel he provided this past semester as part of his Kaufman project. He is the current Kaufman Chair of University Distinguished Teaching Scholars. And next week, he'll bring another panel, a little bit more about how to actually get that research going. So talk about ethics issues, IRB issues, those kinds of things. So that's going to be great. But today, we have a wonderful presentation that is a extension of what we had done last year with Pat Ackerman from our Solana campus. It'll be entitled Online Learning and Plain Language Principles. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ackerman.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
So I am going to share my screen, and thank you all for spending your lunch hour with me. And I'm going to try to leave sufficient time at the end to have questions, but if you think of questions along the way, if you would post them in the chat bar, I'll visit that before I leave to make sure that I answer all your questions, and I will make the PowerPoint available to everyone at the end. So I have been teaching language arts for Kansas State University for 22 years. These are some of the classes that I've taught over the years, but in the last 5 years, I have been asked to teach technical communication on the Salina campus. And the former teacher of this class, who took a position in China, had incorporated plain language into the technical writing course. And I didn't have a lot of information on it, so I started doing some research. And as I did that, I learned that the research I had done in readability analysis was directly linked to plain language and all made sense for technical communication. So hopefully today, what I would like to do is show you how those things that I just talked about can assist with your online teaching practice. So Kansas State University's academic vision statement is here in front of you. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I do want you to focus on the last sentence. It says, we endeavor to prepare citizens who will continue to learn and will contribute to the societies in which they live and work. Technology has progressively changed the societies in which our students live and work for many years. But the last 48 months, next month, it will be 2 years when we didn't come back from spring break because of COVID. And in that period of time, the worlds in the societies in which our students live and work and in which we live and work have changed dramatically. And so it's really important to revisit vision statements occasionally and give some thought to the language there and how we respond to that notion of changing societies and paradigm shifts. So at Kansas State University, we have 5 undergraduate student learning outcomes, which basically means that anyone who sees a student applies for a job with them has on their resume that they have a degree from Kansas State University. There are 5 things that company should be able to assume about that individual, regardless of whether they graduated from the College of Ed, the College of Agriculture, the College of Engineering. And those 5 things are the undergraduate student learning outcomes. They should be able to assume that these students have exceptional breadth and depth of knowledge, that they have high levels of academic and professional integrity, that they have strong diversity awareness, that they have exemplary communication skills, and that they have the ability to think critically and solve problems. I'm going to focus on the 2 at the bottom. So those SLOs that were adopted by our faculty senate and the provost's office in 2004, if you'll look just at the language, at the keywords in the critical thinking definition, access and interpret information, adapt to changing situations, make complex decisions, evaluate actions. Those are all things that have been amped up during COVID for our students. They've had to do these things in high gear, and we have as well. And also they've had to learn how to communicate in different ways. Historically, so the three things I really want to talk about today is I want to talk briefly about technical writing and how it differs from academic writing that we are all accustomed to doing in academic settings. I want to speak a little bit to the history of readability and readability analysis and why it's relevant. And then I want to speak about the role that plain language plays in those two topics. So traditionally, as academics, we have all in our education, and we have our students write research papers, essays, reports, articles, oral presentations, outlines, and annotated bibliographies. Those are all familiar types of writing to us. The primary audience for those documents are typically our instructor, maybe our peers if there's peer review or sharing in the classes, but there's an assumption that the audience we're writing to has a certain level of education. They should at least have a high school diploma. If it's for our instructor, then there are many advanced degrees. And our objectives in writing those assignments are to demonstrate that we have a rhetorical understanding of the subject matter of our audience, and that we either want to inform or persuade them, that we're demonstrating original thought, and our goal is to receive a grade and earn a degree, more of a forward motion type of process. Technical communication has a variety of definitions, but the biggest difference is that it's more interactive than the types of academic writing that we are accustomed to doing in university settings. Typically, when we write something in technical communication, we are doing, the audience is expecting something from us, and we are expecting them to either solve a problem, follow some instructions, discover, shape, or transmit information. It's a much more interactive process. The audience for technical communication can vary. It's not necessarily an educated audience. It might be for our peers. It might be for customers who are buying a product following instruction. In a work situation, it might be our supervisors, it might be our clientele, which then implies that we have diverse educational levels. We may or may not be writing for audiences that have a high school degree or above. Our objective in technical communication is to help readers find, understand, and use information effectively. That is exactly why this is relevant to online teaching platforms, because in online teaching, whether you were teaching online before COVID or whether you were immersed in it in the last 48 months, you've learned that the ways that you engage your audience and the ways that you help students understand information, first they have to be able to find it. And then when they find it, they have to be able to understand it. And then we want them to be able to use it to accomplish the goals of the course. And if we were to write in an academic format, just blocks of gray text over and over and over on a screen, first of all, many students wouldn't read it, and those who read it might not read it all the way through, and they might not process the information, because these students have grown up using technology and getting information. They have access to more information online than we've ever had in our lifetimes, and they're accustomed to getting their information in different ways. And so we need to, there's a little bit of a mental shift that we have to take to go from thinking, and when we work online with students, from giving them documents that are written in an academic format. Of course, we want standards, we want academic standards, but we have to think about our delivery methods and the best ways to help students find, understand, and use information. So in effect, we have become technical writers ourselves. In technical communication, the deliverables vary. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the types of things that you might use technical writing for. The ones in boldface are some of the assignments that I work with students in a technical communication class. And they all have different purposes. They all have different audiences, but they all imply a relationship between the document, between the writer and the reader. I'm not sure what happened here. My computer's not advancing. Just a minute. Sorry, I lost. Okay, so just a little bit of history about readability analysis. One of my scholarship areas for decades has been readability analysis. Students have a tendency to think that when you grade a paper that it's very subjective, that it's a lot of your opinion about whether it's written at a college level or not written at a college level. And readability analysis is a scholarly area that has some very specific history and structure. So in the 1940s, the United States military contracted with Rudolf Flesch. During World War II, the US military decided that they were publishing documents that were written over the heads of their readers, and they wanted to create a system where they were creating documents that were readable by people who in the military who may or may not have a high school education. And so they asked Rudolf Flesch to come up with a proposal. And then in 1976, John Kincaid modified Flesch's formula, specifically under contract with the US Navy, to change Flesch's formula, which I'm going to show you here in a minute, to make it demonstrate a grade level. So just quickly, you've all heard different numbers about what grade level the average American public reads at. Can someone, and I'm not going to call your names, just someone say what you think that grade level is? What grade level does the average American citizen read at?
I've heard 8th.
8th, anyone else? 7th to 8th grade is typically the number that's demonstrated. And since John Kincaid modified his formula, there have been over 40 readability formulas developed. So let's talk a little bit about Rudolf Flesch's formula first of all. So Rudolf Flesch's reading E-score rates a block of text on a 100-point scale. The higher the score it gets, the easier it is to read. The lower the score, the more difficult. So here's his formula using average sentence length and average number of syllables per word. And if you apply that formula to a paragraph of text, it will give you a number of 0 to 100. Okay, so 90 to 100 means that it's easily understandable by an average 11-year-old in the lower score. So here are some publications whose text has been analyzed using Flesch's reading E-score. And it makes sense. The Harvard Law Review has a lower score, and it would make sense that the Harvard Law Review is written at a higher readability score. I've used this with students, particularly those students who've come in and they've gotten A's all through high school, and they come in and they give me a paper and I grade them with a C, and they get very angry and frustrated and say, that's just your opinion that it's a C. And so when we apply the readability score to it and they realize that the document they've written scores out at a 5th or 6th grade reading level, then you can begin to show them some ways that they can improve the dynamics of their writing. But this is how Flesch's score works out. So then Kincaid took the score, took the algorithm, tweaked it a little bit, still using average sentence length and average number of syllables per word, but instead of coming up with a score of 0 to 100, it came up with a score that reflected grade level. Here are some documents you're familiar with, and just to show you how they scored. So this is a section of Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. A piece written by Albert Einstein in 1946. Under the Flesch-Kincaid model, it came out at a 13, above high school grade. Dwight D. Eisenhower's Chance for Peace speech, which is when all of this conversation was taking place about readability, 8th grade. And a section of Barack Obama's 2009 inaugural address, high school senior. So practical applications for readability analysis is it's been used for many years by textbook selection committees in education. I have colleagues older than I who have memories of before computers could do all of this scanning and analysis for them, would have to manually go through a textbook, take a block of text and count the average sentence length and the average number of words per sentence. And they would have to learn how to calculate the grade level of that textbook based on readability analysis. Government and military agencies now require these documents. I'm going to talk about their documents to be analyzed. Department of Defense. Florida was the first state where life insurance policies had to have a Flesch-Kincaid score of 45 or greater. All word processing software now has some type of readability analysis built into the software. And I've been to many professional writing conferences where writers will tell me that they use readability software in Grammarly or other programs to make sure that their novel that they're writing isn't written over the heads of their intended audience. Specifically, those who write young adult lit novels would say, I don't want to be writing over their heads, so I run it through the software and it gives me good feedback about whether my writing is too complex for a 6th grade audience. These are the instructions about how to do readability analysis in Microsoft Word. And so you can snap a picture of it, or when you get the PowerPoint, you can refer back to it, but it's just to show you the type of instructions. So if we go back to this slide about that it contained definitions about technical communications, a lot of the goals in online teaching and technical communication are the same, okay? In online teaching, we want to help our students discover, shape, and transmit information. We want them to solve problems, learn about content, carry out particular tasks, follow instructions, make decisions. We want our online course material to motivate the students. And again, the audience, our audience is more defined than the general public, obviously, but there are certain things we need to consider about our purpose and their prior levels of knowledge, but our goals are the same. The goal is to help students find, understand, and use information effectively. So following up on the 1976 Act of John Kincaid, in 2010, after all of this process, our legislative process is cumbersome and slow, but in 2010, President Obama signed the plain language legislation into law. And basically what it means is it requires every federal government agency since 2010, they have been required to develop plain language protocols in their department and train each and every federal employee to produce more readable documents. Now, more readable documents, before I started talking, might have been a little vague to you, but now you can see that there are specific criteria for determining how to make a document more readable. So I've put a bunch of links in here for you. I teach on the technology and aviation campus, so I tend to, with my students, use the FAA's plain language guidelines. But recently I had to go onto the Social Security website and front and center this for personal reasons. There was information about their plain language policies. And why does this matter at a university setting? Well, recently our mask mandate and our COVID policies were impacted by whether or not we received federal funding through grants. And a lot of our colleges and programs receive federal funding. It's not unreasonable to assume that somewhere down the line, plain language might trickle down from the federal agencies who administer those funds to us, down to those people receiving those funds and saying that when you produce documents for the public based on your grant funding, that you must be familiar with and have policies in place regarding plain language. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen real quick, and I'm going to jump over to the U.S. government plain language guidelines page. So this is the government's page about plain language. It talks to you specifically about the law and the guidelines. It gives you examples, training materials, resources. I have my students watch a video that was produced by the Department of Defense because it does a really good job, good overview. But if you click on the plain language guidelines, there are all kinds of tools, But again, the goals are the same. Help them find what they need, understand what they find, and be able to use it to meet their needs. Those are the three primary tenets of plain language. It gives you a copy of the law. But there was another link here I wanted to share with you. There are trainings, all kinds of things. But I just want to make you aware of that. And then I'm going to stop sharing again and quickly go over to just one example. So we have the College of Agriculture at Kansas State University. So I have opened the US, are you seeing the US Department of Agriculture's plain language page?
Yes.
Okay, so it begins with a pledge to the public. Anybody who goes to the USDA's page, whether they be a farmer or a researcher, that we pledge to produce documents that are readable and usable, that they're clear and understandable. And every year they do a report about how they're compliant, how they train their employees, what changes they've made to their documents. It's now part of the federal legislative system. It gives you links to federal plain language tips and tools, the law. So every federal agency that you go to, if you go to their website, and I've shared a few of them with you in the PowerPoint, will have a plain language page. And as I said to someone earlier, after I did this presentation last year, I was contacted by, I had a member of the extension, K-State Extension, who attended, and they contacted their supervisor, and then we scheduled for me to do a training for them, and they talked about how useful that would be now that they have to deliver a lot of their programming online, that just the use of the plain language tools and how they could help them with delivery of that material was useful. And progressively, as I go to conferences, I'm hearing people talk about, actually, one of the things that happened is in technical communications, I asked the students to write all of their documents that they submit to me using plain language principles. And one of the assignments is to take a set of existing instructions for something a college student might need to do and rewrite them using plain language principles. I had a very intuitive student who took an assignment from another one of their classes that was about 3 pages long, written in big, long blocks of text, very narrative. A lot of the information was buried in the text, and they rewrote that assignment from another class using plain language principles and submitted it for a grade. And in the comments, they said, if all of our instructors would do this, it would make our lives so much easier. We would be able to understand what their expectations are if they would apply plain language principles to their documents. So here are a lot of resources available to you, and there are many others. And I've also included the Simplified Technical English Manual that was the precursor to plain language, and it's been used in European, primarily in business and industry, for a very long time. I keep losing control of my PowerPoint. I'm not sure why. I'm going to start it over. I apologize. Okay. So what are the principles of plain language? Just a few of the things that I want to talk about. Some of the principles include, and the FAA has a plain language toolkit. I've given you the link to that. I use that with my students since many of them are in the professional pilot program. It includes chunking of information, the use of white space. It has a lot to do with visual representation, how we design our documents as much as it does content. The use of bulleted lists, the use of personal pronouns. So in academic writing, we've been taught to write in the objective third person voice for many, many years. But in plain language, when it's a more interactive communication, mode of communication, they encourage you to use personal pronouns and speak directly to your audience and say I and say you. Not necessarily that you're going to tell them to do that for their academic assignments, but when you communicate with them online, it makes it more engaging and more personal. The role that active voice and the use of active verbs can play in increasing the dynamics and how they add more information to the content, the role that that plays. Writing in present tense, that it's okay to use contractions in technical communication where it isn't always okay in formal academic writing. Another thing is that if you open 20 web pages, I doubt that from different companies and organizations, very few of them use Times Roman font or any serif font. So serif fonts are those that have embellishments or make them look pretty and attractive. Plain language prescribes sans serif fonts. Sans, again, is the French word for without. We want fonts without serifs. They've been proven to be much more readable in an electronic and a screen environment. The use of subheadings, the use of graphics, the importance of layout and design. Those are some of the key fundamental principles that encourage, that make a document more readable in an online environment, according to the plain language principles. So I've talked a little bit about the differences between technical and academic writing. It's not exhaustive, and there have been many, many studies about workplace writing over the years, Mike Rose and other scholars, but just given you some food for thought and invited you to think about it in the context of your own online teaching. I've spoken to readability and what makes a document readable, and that there are some tools in place for determining the readability of a document in terms of whether you're writing at a first grade, fourth grade, college reading level, and introduced just the concept of plain language and what the federal government is doing. And there are a lot of articles and things written about, are we just dumbing it down? But we're not. I'm not prescribing that we only use plain language, that we only use technical communication, because in academic settings, academic writing is still very, very important and serves its purpose. But when we step into teaching in online platforms, it's to our students' advantage that we give some consideration to how we publish documents or instructions or assignments, or even in our online syllabus, how we construct that and format that so that it's easier for students to access that information. In each of my classes, I construct an online toolbox for students. These are some of the things that I put in it. So at the bottom of my weekly modules in Canvas, I have a module that's just called Online Toolbox, and anytime I find something that can be useful to them, I put it in there. We use it in class, but I also encourage them to save those tools, not just for use in other classes, but in their professional lives. They won't remember all of these things when they get out in their job until their boss asks them to create a poster or asks them to do a white paper or create a report of findings, and they know that they need to make it as readable as possible, but they can't remember. So by creating the toolbox, hopefully those are tools that they can carry with them into their professional lives. This is a little bit of a dated survey, but this is consistent with what employers are telling they want our students to be able to do, to plan, organize, and prioritize, and to communicate well. And this is one example of a tool that we can model to our students in our teaching that might be able to help them communicate. And it also connects back to our own student learning outcomes. And here are a few references, aside from the links that I gave you to the government agencies. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open this up for conversation. Anyone have any questions or comments about any of those things?
Thanks so much, Dr. Ackerman. We appreciate that presentation, a very, very provocative information. And so, yeah, great stuff. Yeah, I'm happy to turn it over to questions from the audience. Please feel free to unmute and ask them out loud, drop them in the chat. We'll moderate the chat as best we can. So yeah, and does anyone have any questions for Dr. Ackerman?
Hello, Dr. Ackerman. Thank you for a great presentation. It was very insightful. I learned something new. I just want to know if Canvas actually has that feature to check the readability when we put something on page or some kind of PDF format.
I'm not aware of a tool like that in Canvas. It would be a good thing to find out, to follow up on, though. And again, we're not required to use plain language in the university, nor do we want everything written at a 7th grade reading level in the university, but for instructions that we're giving on computers and just educating people about that, I think is important. So I'm not sure how it could be incorporated into Canvas, but I'm not a computer technology person. I know that Grammarly software has that capability, and most word processing programs have the capability to test for readability, but not for plain language.
Thank you.
Sherlyn, what does writing style look like in plain language writing? What makes a writer's signature? Primarily how it looks different is that it's not just paragraphs following one another, paragraphs of blocks of text, just gray text. Typically, plain language has subheadings, has some white space in between. Instead of putting a list in a long rambling sentence, there are bulleted lists. Occasionally there are infographics that might explain something in a bar chart or a graph better than if you just explained it in a paragraph, so I can look at it and draw conclusions rather than reading through another paragraph of information. Thank you, Kristen.
Sometimes when you're communicating with someone, whether it's verbally or through text, there's a word that is multisyllabic or it's a bit specific. And for years, I've tried to make sure that things are simple when I'm communicating like that. It's good to know that there's a name for it and instructions, just something I've picked up over time. But sometimes the only way that I can say something is to use a very specific term. There are not always, is there some other way to say something?
Right.
What's your advice for those situations?
You know, it's contextual. First of all, it's situational. It depends on if your audience, you have to think rhetorically about whether your audience is familiar with that term or not. And if it's an audience that might not be, you need to figure out a way to define it or clarify that term. Again, it depends on your audience and the situation that you're in. But if, for instance, a student in my class were designing a research poster and they were to use a highly technical term that they're not sure if their audience would understand it, I would encourage them to define it somehow and clarify it, or give some information that enhances the meaning. But if you're talking to another expert in your field who is obviously going to understand it, then that might not be necessary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I will share this PowerPoint with Hayden so that all of you have access to the information in there. There are many, many other tools and resources, but I do predict that down the line, if we receive federal funding, at some point, this plain language notion is going to trickle down to the organizations who are writing those grants, especially if you're producing deliverables that are going to the general public.
Excellent. I have a question, Dr. Ackerman, and yeah, so relevant and recent research shows that public trust has weakened in higher education. Public trust in higher education has weakened in recent decades. And I'm wondering if you think that plain language principles can help bridge that gap, kind of reconcile higher ed and the public and the larger community a little bit, and just making our writings and our research a little bit more accessible. Do you think that could help, like I said, sort of reconcile that a little bit?
That's a big question with a lot of answers. I think when we communicate intent to the general public, it doesn't need to necessarily be written in academic jargon. I think if you're trying to reach the general public and you do that, it tends to make them a bit defensive. If you use a term like Catherine said that they don't understand and you don't explain it, then their response is going to be this, or an emotional reaction, I don't understand, or to just ignore you completely. And I in no means think that for our academic purposes, for our peer-reviewed journals, for our communiques to one another, to our expectations of our students, they do need to understand how to communicate at an academic level. But when we're addressing the general public, we need to look at that rhetorical situation, and plain language might be one way of communicating complex information to the general public that's more digestible. But I don't know if I can solve the problem of perception.
Any other questions for Dr. Ackerman this afternoon?
All right, well, I will get the PowerPoint to Hayden right away. Hopefully the tools that I presented will be helpful to you. And I have, like I say, I've been going out to smaller groups across campus, having individual conversations with departments and groups and degree programs and the extension agents about ways that in their online platforms that plain language might help them engage their audiences more actively.
Excellent. Sounds great. Thanks so much again, Dr. Ackerman, for
Thanks
this.
to everyone. Have a good day. Stay warm. Be safe tomorrow.
Thank you, Dr. Ackerman. Just real quick, earlier in the session, my colleague Noah dropped a link in the chat, which is a link to information on the Teaching and Learning Center Professional Development Certificate and Fellowship information. And then my colleague Mary just dropped a link to the post-event Qualtrics survey. And so next week, February 23rd, we are excited to host Dr. Jason Bergtold from the Department of Ag Economics and this year's Kaufman Chair, and his colleagues Heath Ritter from the University Research Compliance Office. He's the director of that office, and Shams El Adawi, who is a graduate student in the Department of Physics, and they will be discussing how to get involved in the scholarship of teaching and learning. So definitely looking forward to that session. Same time, same Zoom link, you know where to find us. And so we hope to see you then.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Hayden.
Thank you, Dr. Ackerman. Take care.
Bye-bye.